have the privilege of chairing the afternoon session in the absence of the President. And we'll begin as soon as, I don't know if there are any other people who are coming in. The first order of business for this afternoon is the report on the status and treatment of refugees. And I will invite the Deputy Secretary General of ALCO to introduce the subject, the topic to us. You're welcome. Before we begin with the topic, the status and treatment of refugees, the Secretary General would wish to make a few remarks regarding the resolutions that you were asked to comment on.
Thank you, Madam Vice President. This is actually housekeeping. In view of the many proposed amendments made by member states to the resolution that we have prepared, and in view of the acute shortage of our secretariat, and in view of the time constraint, we would encourage those interested parties to have an informal consultation with the hope that there would be a consensus on the resolution of all the agenda item of ALCO by Thursday. So the informal consultation, if you would like to proceed on that, you are welcome to start even today. Thank you very much, Madam Vice President.
Thank you very much, Secretary General. I will invite the DSG to make introductory remarks, but in view of time constraints, it is proposed that we will restrict the session on the status and treatment of refugees to about an hour, so that we can then move on to the half-day session that's scheduled with the International Law Commission. So we will ask member states in making their observations and comments to be as brief as possible, so that we can allow as many members as possible to participate in the deliberations. Over to you.
Thank you, Madam Vice President, Excellencies, distinguished delegates, ladies and gentlemen. ALCO has been concerned with the issues relating to the status and the treatment of refugees ever since this topic was introduced in its agenda in 1964 at the behest of the Arab Republic of Egypt. The record of contributions on the part of ALCO to the cause of the protection of the refugees includes the adoption of the principles concerning the treatment of the refugees in 1966 at its 8th annual session, which are commonly known as Bangkok principles. Further study improved upon these principles by adopting to addenda the right to return in 1960 and the burden-sharing principles in 1987. These principles were once again revised in the year 2001. Your Excellencies, escalating violence in various parts of Asia, Africa, and the Middle East continued to set back situations relating to refugees and displacement. The Secretariat report in front of you deals with the recent development in these regions in the hope of informing the subsequent deliberations. Let me highlight some points in the report, but the view of the time constraints, I will touch upon these points only briefly. An estimated 11 million people required the attention of the United Nations High Commissioner for Refugees, UNHCR, in Africa, including refugees, asylum seekers, internally displaced persons, and stateless persons. The primary drivers of these problems have been ongoing conflicts and insecurity. As has been the case in the past, sexual and gender-based violence remains as one of the principal concerns, and UNHCR's updated strategy to deal with such violence will hopefully guide its prevention and response efforts. Particular attention will be paid to the need of displaced women and children, and age, gender, and diversity will be brought into consideration for program activities. The Asia and the Pacific region has one of the world's largest refugee situations, with the region accounting for approximately a third of the global population of concern to UNHCR, or some 9.5 million people. The Afghan refugee situation continued to be one of the world's largest protracted refugee situations. The solution strategy for Afghan refugees, launched in 2012, has the triple goal of facilitating voluntary repatriation, sustaining reintegration, and maintaining adequate support for refugees and their host communities. The conflict in the Syrian Arab Republic has caused massive deterioration in the humanitarian situation. More than 2.5 million Syrian refugees are estimated to have fled the country, while there are more than 6.5 million IDPs. Sanctions have had significant impact on the socio-economic situation of large parts of Syria. Meanwhile, sectarian violence in Iraq and now the rise of the Islamic State of Iraq and the Levant will only contribute to the already dire refugee and displacement situation inside and outside of Iraq. Furthermore, a serious situation remains in Gaza. As already pointed out by some member states yesterday, the situation has deteriorated with the escalating hostility and death toll in Gaza. Your Excellencies, at this time, it is also perhaps appropriate for ALC member states to revisit and reaffirm the 1966 Bangkok Principles on Status and Treatment of Refugees. Particularly relevant is Article 10 of the Bangkok Principles pertaining to burden sharing. To reiterate, Article 10 propounds that, first, the refugee phenomenon continues to be a matter of global concern and needs to the support of international community as a whole for its solution, and as such, the principle of burden sharing should be viewed in that context. Second, the principle of international solidarity and burden sharing needs to be applied progressively to facilitate the process of durable solutions for refugees, whether within or outside a particular region, keeping in perspective that durable solution in certain situations may need to be found by allowing access to refugees in countries outside that region due to political, social, and economic considerations. Third, principle of international solidarity and burden sharing should be seen as applying to all aspects of the refugee situation, including the development and strengthening of the standards and of treatment of refugees, support to states in protecting and assisting refugees, the provision of durable solutions, and the support of international bodies with responsibilities for the protection and assistance of refugees. Fourth, international solidarity and cooperation in burden sharing should be manifested whenever necessary through effective concrete measures where major share be borne by developed countries in support of states requiring assistance, whether through financial or material aid or through resettlement opportunities. Fifth, in all circumstances, the respect for fundamental humanitarian principles is an obligation for all members of the international community. Giving practical effect to the principle of international solidarity and burden sharing considerably facilitates states' fulfillment of their responsibilities in this regard. Dealing with refugee situations in the Asian and African region requires coordinated efforts on the part of all the states in the region to promote protection and eventual durable solutions for the refugees. It also requires consistent efforts from all involved states to institute the kind of top-down system that will deliver assistance to refugees in the most efficient manner possible. This may include ratifying and implementing the refugee, stateless, and IDP-related conventions. It also requires for states to honor their international obligations, particularly with regard to the respect of relevant humanitarian and human rights principles. It may also be prudent to revisit the guiding principle on internal displacement at this time, especially considering the IDP accounts for greater percentage of UNHCR's persons of concern, status than refugees. And because there is no international legal instrument worldwide to handle their plight. It is, of course, not intended to detrimental to the sovereignty of the states concerned. And these guiding principles are raised, but rather to affect the durable solution to the various massive IDP crises in Asia, Africa, and the Middle East. I thank you, Madam Vice President.
Thank you very much for that introduction. May I now invite member states to make their contributions and comments on the topic at hand. We have received a confirmation or information from Iran, China, Japan, South Africa, and Kenya that they will comment on this topic. So may I invite the distinguished delegate of Okay. All right. May I invite the distinguished delegate from the Islamic Republic of Iran to comment?
Thank you, Madam President. At the outset, I would like to thank the Secretariat for providing us with the informative document on the status and treatment of refugees, which facilitated our discussion on this agenda item. Madam President, the issue on the status of refugees has been introduced to the ALCO 50 years ago in 1964. Since then, the continuous affairs of ALCO have resulted in a different outcome on refugee matters. Notable among them are the adoption of principles concerning treatment of refugees, or Bandung principles, and principles on burden sharing. These achievements, along with other activities carried out by ALCO since 1964, are an appropriate basis for ALCO on which to further expand its considerations. Given that most protracted refugee situations in the world are located in the two regions, the deliberation on the issue from the perspective of durable solutions deserves to be included on the agenda of the work in the hand of ALCO. Attention should be drawn towards the role of resettlement as a durable solution for protracted refugee situations and the international responsibilities of all members of international community in the event of mass influx of refugees. The fact is that most countries from the two regions are under pressing socioeconomic concerns arising from the long-term presence of millions of refugees. This situation, coupled with lack of enough resources, has strained their capacities for dealing with the protracted refugee situations. Refraining by developed states from looking at resettlement as a durable solution and the lack of will in the countries of origin countries to provide the basic requirements for sustainable reintegration has further exacerbated the protracted refugee situations. It is unfortunate that the policies of many of the third states demonstrate that they just opt for finding solution in the region where the tragedy has occurred. Unfortunately, today, the resettlement approach of the developed countries has been combined with their migration policies, the result being the predominance of a highly selective approach by these countries. Madam President, the Islamic Republic of Iran is the host country to one of the main protracted refugee situations in the world. More than 30 years ago, millions of Afghan refugees sought shelter in Iran. In some periods of time, the number of refugees exceeded 5 million. Now, after the passage of 3 decades, and despite the improvement of the situation in Afghanistan, Iran still hosts about 1 million refugees. In 2012, the solution strategy for Afghan refugees was launched after negotiations by the host countries of Afghan refugees, the country of origin, and UNHCR. The strategy solution first and foremost aims at facilitating voluntary repatriation through providing the country of origin with the requirements which are needed for sustaining reintegration and at the same time supporting refugees in the host countries. We hope that with the help of the international community, firm steps will be taken towards the aim of the strategy. Madam Vice President, regrettably, the situation in Iraq has caused once again a new wave of influx of refugees. Millions of civilians have fallen victim to vicious, brutal attacks emanating from violent extremism. In Syria, the situation of the civilians, due to the ongoing conflicts and the imposed sanctions, is unfavorable and dissatisfactory, and as a result, millions of displaced persons have been suffering from the untenable situation. In Gaza, brutal attacks from the air, sea, and land have claimed the lives of hundreds of innocent civilians, many of them women and children. Vast destruction in Gaza has rendered homeless thousands of already bereaved families. We express our solidarity with them and their plight, and we stand ready to deploy all possible efforts to alleviate their suffering. I thank you.
Thank you very much, delegate from Iran. May I now invite the distinguished delegate from the People's Republic of China to make your comment.
Thank you, Madam President. The refugee issue is a global challenge. The majority of global refugees are in Asia and Africa. China welcomes the discussion among member states of the ACOR on the issue and expects states to exchange views on how to reduce the number of refugees at its source and grant humanitarian treatment those eligible. The Chinese government pays great attention to the protection of refugees. It adopts a serious attitude in the fulfillment of its obligations under the Convention relating to the status of refugees and its protocol. For example, since 1978, China has given asylum to about 300,000 Indo-Chinese refugees, thus significantly contributing to the safeguarding of peace and stability of this region. The Chinese government reaffirms its commitment to taking an active part in international cooperation in this regard. China believes that the international community should pay adequate attention to the root causes of the refugee problem. Wars and armed conflicts remain the main causes of the emergence of the refugee and internally displaced person problem. Across Asia and Africa, countries that were or are still at war or armed conflict see a large number of refugees and IDPs. It is of essential importance for countries to maintain political stability, resolve their internal and international crises in a peaceful manner, and refrain from the use of force so as to avoid a potential refugee problem. The Chinese government highly appreciates the efforts and contributions made by the ECHO to resolve the refugee problem, including the adoption of the principles concerning the treatment of refugees in 1966 at its 8th annual session, and the burden sharing principles in 1987 at the 26th session. As we all know, the burden sharing principles has been widely accepted by the international community. Madam President, protection of refugees is a responsibility shared by the international community. Countries of origin, asylum, and settlement should work together under the principle of international solidarity and burden sharing, and fulfill the obligations arising from the Convention relating to the status of refugees and its protocol. China calls on all countries to ratify this convention and its protocol at an earlier time. The developed countries should provide more assistance to the developing ones, which give asylum to the majority of refugees in the world and offer resettlement to more refugees. It's worth noting that the issue of transnational illegal migration has become increasingly prominent in recent years. Some people with infractions or even criminals, among others, often flee abroad. Illegal immigrants and fugitives also seek refugee status for asylum. China believes countries should strictly distinguish refugees from illegal immigrants and criminals and avoid the abuse of asylum policy, double standards, or politicization of the refugee issue. Thank you, Madam President.
Thank you very much, China. Distinguished delegate from Japan, you now have the floor.
Thank you, Madam Vice President. The refugees problem has been for a long time gathering worldwide attention as one of the critical human rights issues facing us today. Japan has been working more closely than ever in the field of human rights by promoting its basic policy of emphasizing universal values such as freedom, democracy, respect for fundamental human rights, and the rule of law. Aiming at improving human rights and humanitarian issues around the world, Japan is making proactive contributions through multilateral initiatives that include UN as well as through bilateral dialogues. We are very much concerned that the number of displaced people who are both refugees and internally displaced people has become the largest on record due to the multiple large-scale humanitarian crises we are facing since last year, such as the worsening humanitarian situation in South Sudan, Central African Republic, or the deteriorating situation in Syria and surrounding countries. At the same time, it is critical not to forget, crucial not to forget the protracted refugee and IDP situation, such as in Afghanistan, Somalia, and the Democratic Republic of Congo. Finding durable solution to the displacement of such a large number of people is an essential task that needs to be addressed, as unsolved protracted cases are a humanitarian challenge as well as an obstacle for effective assistance. In order to find durable solutions for refugee and IDP cases, seamless assistance provided through close coordination and cooperation among humanitarian agencies, development agencies, donor countries, and affected countries is of great importance. Freeing such refugees from dependence and promoting self-reliance together with development of host communities are also of great significance. Human security and peace building are important pillars of Japan's foreign policy. Human security is an important aspect for the realization of a durable solution of refugees and IDPs, and we intend to continue making further contributions in this regard. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Japan. May I invite the distinguished delegate from South Africa to take the floor.
Thank you, Madam Vice President. Many South Africans have experienced the reality of being a political refugee or asylum seeker due to the past political situation in South Africa. It is these experiences as exiles that makes the status and treatment of refugees an important topic for South Africa. We congratulate ALCO on the work which they have done on this important topic. South Africa is committed to securing for refugees the legal protection that international law provides them. In particular, we recognize the duty, the principle of non-refoulement, which requires that refugees may not be returned directly or indirectly to countries where they risk persecution or danger of their lives. Refugees will not be prosecuted on account of their illegal entry into or presence in South Africa, provided they present themselves without delay to the authorities and show good cause for their illegal entry or presence. Refugees are not expelled from South Africa except on grounds of national security or public order and are guaranteed basic human rights. Madam Vice President, in relation to asylum seekers and refugees, the Refugees Act 1998 provides an elaborate normative and institutional framework for the regulation of entry into and stay in South Africa. People with refugee status may not be refused entry into the Republic, expelled or extradited, or returned to a country where they will be subjected to persecution on account of their race, religion, nationality, political opinion, or membership of a particular social group, or where their life, physical safety, or freedom would be threatened on account of external aggression, occupation, foreign domination, or other events seriously disturbing public order in either part or the whole of that country. In conclusion, refugees also bear obligations while in South Africa, the main one being to respect the laws of the Republic, and any refugee who breaks the law is dealt with in terms of our domestic law. South Africa is party to the International Legal Framework for Governing Refugees and the 2967 Protocol thereto, as well as the African Union Convention governing the specific aspects of refugee problems in Africa. It remains important for governments across the world to reaffirm the values upon which international agreements of refugee protection are based. Thank you.
Thank you very much, South Africa, for your comments. May I invite the distinguished delegate from Kenya to make her observations?
Thank you, Madam President. On behalf of Kenya, we wish to make the following statement. The Republic of Kenya is party to the 1951 UN Convention on the Status of Refugees, the 1967 Protocol on Refugees, and the 1969 OAU Convention governing specific aspects of refugee problems in Africa. Through its national law, the Refugees Act, Kenya has established the Department of Refugee Affairs, whose mandate is to 1. Carry out registration and refugee status determination, coordination of provision of services, for instance, food, shelter, medical care, primary education, safety, and security. C. Maintenance of an appropriate registration and documentation system for asylum seekers and refugees in Kenya. D. Issue identification cards and movement passes to refugees in the country. E. Issue conventional travel documents, refugee passports, to facilitate refugees' travel. F. Management of refugee camps, reception, and transit centers. distinguished delegates, since the early 1990s, refugees have continued to arrive in the country and have been accommodated in two sites, Dadaab in northeastern Kenya and Kakuma, northwestern part of Kenya. Currently, Kenya is home to over 600,000 refugees whose nationalities include Somalis, Ethiopians, Congolese, Eritreans, South Sudanese, Rwandese, Burundians, Ugandans, and Tanzanians. The majority of the refugee population comes from Somalia, which has been experiencing civil war for the last 2 decades.